Hey there. I think it's time for a classic Emily Blabathon. I guess I should say impassioned Putsy Blabathon. I have a lot on my heart. And I have a lot to say, and yet I kind of don't know where to start. So I think I'm going to use the preface from Nature, Man and Woman by Alan Watts to walk me through what I want to say. I think it's going to get me there. So look out, I'm going to stop often as he guides me through my thoughts. This is the preface, and it's brilliant, as usual. As I look around my library, I'm often strangely troubled by the way in which my books fit so snugly into categories. Most of my books have to do with philosophy, psychology, and religion, and they represent points of view from every great culture in the world. I'm getting a little emotional. Yet with an absolutely oppressive monotony, they fit themselves into the stale dualities of philosophical and theological argument. Varied from time to time with sensible and uninspiring compromises. Volume after volume is so easily identified as supernaturalist or naturalist, vitalist or mechanist, metaphysical or positivist, spiritualist or materialist, and the compromised volumes are usually so watered down as to be compilations of platitudes and sentimentalities. This is the first time I've ever read anybody saying this. And it's been so much of my journey because everywhere I've gone, I've studied philosophy and different religions, and everyone is so siloed. Even people, we're so siloed. We believe one thing, we think one thing, and it's so unsatisfying. And that's one reason I have books strewn everywhere, and I'm ordering multiple from all different types of perspective, new teachers, new ways of thinking about it. Because to me, the answer is in all of it together. When we combine it all together, if you take the pieces, you get a holistic view. But when you dice it up and you just become an expert, and then you try to hold that position and defend it, you become exactly like everything else, and we're not getting anywhere. I feel a mission. I want to move the spiritual needle. We just keep doing the same thing over and over again as humans. Have you noticed? We're just marching to the grave. When good things happen, I take credit. When bad things happen, I blame other people or I blame God. And everyone's just marching to the grave. And it doesn't make any sense. No one has given me an explanation that makes any sense except this. And this is an intense looking book, but Satan is another name for ego when you study the Kabbalistic tradition. This is a Kabbalistic book. And we're going to dig into that. I'm going to do a deep dive on ego, but everyone is selling this idea that either we came from nothing and we're going nowhere, which is super depressing, or God created us and he's watching us and judging us. We got to earn our way back, but we don't really know what happens till after we die. And that's where all the good stuff or horrible stuff is. So you better enjoy yourself here, or it's okay to be miserable here, depending on which path you choose. And none of it makes any sense. Those are the two options we've had for the origin of the universe for thousands and thousands of years. Well, let me give you a third. We made this place. That's right. You and me. Weird, huh? But it's the only thing that makes sense. And there's so much evidence. It's coming through everywhere. We made this. We're creators. We had it so good that we had no idea what it meant. It meant nothing to us. And so we asked for contrast, right? Garden of Eden. Tree of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil. It wasn't a tree we ate an apple off of. Come on. But it's a metaphorical story. We wanted to know both. We wanted the contrast. And as creators, we got it. And here we are. And we're trying to earn our way back. Not really earn our way back. I shouldn't say that, but realize our way back. Realize it's not. What do you think Jesus did? He wasn't God becoming man any more than you and I are God becoming man, which we are. We're just as much what he was is in us. I said that wrong. Just, whatever, you get my point. As much of his divinity as he was divine, we are too. He's like a big brother. He beat the game. He graduated first. Way to go, Jesus. Can we please take him off of the cross and stop getting so depressed about how he died and stop making him an idol and make him an ideal and live like him. Maybe one of us could graduate. Maybe we could start healing people and take a cut out of Big Pharma's profits. I didn't expect to say all that with that. Let's continue. Underlying all these dualities, there seems to be a basic division of opinion about those two great poles of human thought, spirit and nature. And we always keep them separate. Have you noticed? That's what he's talking about. And then when you mix them together, it's some watered down hoo-hoo nanny. Some people stand plainly for one and against the other. Some stand mainly for one, but give the other a subordinate role. Others attempt to bring the two together, though human thinking moves in such firm ruts that it usually turns out that they've settled inadvertently for one or the other. It is doubtless foolhardy for any philosopher to claim that he has broken loose from these ruts and at the same time said anything meaningful. Thank you, Alan. But maybe when we combine them all together, there is something meaningful. That's what he was doing, right? That's what Alan Watts was up to. And I love that about him. But he also didn't get there. But maybe we can stand on his shoulders. That's my goal, is to stand on everyone's shoulders. I'm not doing anything new. Everybody's already done all the work. But I can study it all and I can bring it all together maybe in a new way. Because he got down about it and I don't blame him. It is a little depressing. And he didn't have a couple of the pieces that I have now. They actually came after his death. Maybe he helped get them here. Discussion is so much a matter of juggling with categories that to start breaking up the categories is usually to break up the discussion. Pointing at another problem. We can't talk about anything we disagree with. I don't like people unless they agree with me. And so I gotta hang out with people who are just like me, which is so weird. Because just because we disagree doesn't mean we can't like each other or love each other or listen to each other. Maybe I'll grow a new brain cell. Maybe I'll view something I think in a new way. We've become so resistant, we haven't become so resistant to listening to other ways of thought. We've always been, let's just be real. But this is not just a matter of categories, logic, and philosophical argument. The opposition of spirit and nature is also a matter of life and feeling. Alan Watts is getting to something really important here of the division of duality and twos. And I'm realizing this more and more. We have two minds. There's actually three parts of us, right? The Trinity. That's in everything. So there's three parts, but there's two that we play in. Like one's a process that's happening really outside of our control. It's always there. But there's two parts of our mind, and that's what he's getting at. That's what these people are doing. We can be an ego, or we can be sort of in this spirit God space. One is life, physical life. One is more feeling. But the funny thing is, ego-ness, or being based in your ego, can show up in any philosopher or theologian, regardless, if they get too focused on their own rightness. And this has to do with the more we believe in a body, the more I think this is me, this body, what I think, my opinions, what I look like, my brain, is my ego self. Spirit is more the feeling piece. It's like not being as invested in this world, realizing that it's not real. That's how Jesus graduated. He realized none of the physical was real. He said, go ahead, beat my body to a pulp, kill me, do what you want with me, think you've betrayed me. None of it's real. And I'm not going to believe in any of it. I'm going to know that it's an illusion and it's not really happening. And what happened? He didn't die. And then he was like, look, guys, I figured it out. And no one got it. They changed the story to being like he was abused, that he's a savior and he's God. But it's the lack of belief and investment in this physical world that this is me that's the split. But the ego is so tricky, which Alan nails down so well in so many of his books, not maybe in this preface, but the ego just keeps changing form. So we have to find a way to make peace with it. And I have other books I'm going to read. I'm going to do a deep dive on this split, but I just have to throw this in here. Okay, so ever since I began to study these matters, I've been puzzled by the way in which exponents of the life of the spirit do not seem to be at home in nature and in their bodies. This is what he's pointing at. It has to be a whole thing. Why wouldn't you be at home in your body or nature? You view them all as suffering. And that's another bit I realized I need to do. I need to do a deep dive on suffering, because that's how we lose trust in everything, is when we suffer. We blame other people or God. We lose all our trust in those things because they're making us suffer. But if we can realize we're generating it, there's no one to blame. And it was just a misunderstanding, and there's a reestablishing of trust when we understand how we created it, to be clear. For even when they do not identify the natural with the evil, they damn it with faint praise. So often I've sympathized with bold pagan rebellion against this bodiless spirituality, and yet never joined it, because the final word of these gather ye rosebuds while you may philosophy is always despair. I get that. So you can't be totally bodiless in your spirituality, like, I'm not an ego, I'm not even here, I'm a floating guru, which just becomes more ego, and completely discounts the beauty and nature of the physical world that we're in relationship with, that we love too. But saying gather ye rosebuds while you may, like, oh, it's all over when we're done, and this is all we have, isn't satisfying either. At the end of the day, that's despair, especially as you get older. If you really think it's all over when you die, it is a dark place to be. As I've said, no faith requires more faith than atheism or the mechanistic view of the universe that he nails in the book. Thinking that intelligence came from stupid chaos or organization came from chaos. We don't have that rule in our universe. Like comes from like. Something can come from nothing, but there was something organized and intelligent that caused it to come into physical being. Spirit can become physical at some point. That's what we're seeing there, but there's still an intelligence to it. So when I was an atheist, I realized one day, I was like, wow, I'm a tiny human spinning on a planet through space. If I think this really all came from nowhere, or if there's a God that made me, either way requires a lot of faith. But atheism gives me nothing in return, and it requires more faith to think that this came from nothing than it is to think that this came from something, even if I can't get the whole dude in a chair with a white beard in the sky, which I don't have anymore. But even if I go with that, it doesn't require as much faith, and it gives me something in return. It gives me a purpose. It gives me a reason. It gives me somewhere I'm going, at least. I don't agree with that either. Obviously, I've come to a new place. But there's something so despairing to think this came from nowhere and is going nowhere, right? It's all chaos. Sorry, I'm revealing this beautiful dragonfly. Isn't this gorgeous? The dragonfly is a symbol of freedom. I got this at the gem and rock show I went to recently. I don't think I posted a video of that. It was mostly wholesale rocks, which was a pretty wild experience. I've never been to a gem and rock show. It was in Denver, and I was like, oh, this is weird. But there was this one booth. There were some really special booths in there, and they came upon this one booth, and this lady is from Peru. You can't get this on Amazon. She only sells wholesale online and not on Amazon. This is a real butterfly wing in this dragonfly, and she casts these. She works with butterfly refuges or whatever you call them down in Peru. And when they pass away, she doesn't do live collection of butterfly wings. She collects them and makes them into jewelry. Her butterflies were amazing, but I think butterflies are a symbol of transformation. I've always been a dragonfly girl, symbol of freedom. Everybody's in their own process, but just had to show it because it's beautiful. It means a lot to me, and it's gorgeous. So this whole gather ye rosebuds while you may philosophy is always despair, or some fortuitous utopianism, which, because it is only a matter of time, comes to the same thing. For the congenitally sick, the victims of accident, the impoverished, and the dying, this philosophy has no message. And isn't that the truth? If this is your one shot, and it's all an accident, and you're disabled, or you're crippled, or a million other things, like you said, you're congenitally sick, you get cancer, you're poor, it's like what? You just got a crapshoot? You die at 5 of some disease? Just a crapshoot meant nothing? It doesn't make logical sense and doesn't give us any basis for trust or faith to enjoy life. And those kinds of sufferings touch all of us. But is the alternative to joy in the body delight? But is the alternative to joy in the body, delight in the discarnate spirit? I gotta read that weird. But is the alternative to joy in the body delight in the discarnate spirit? Right, so you can only take joy in your separated spirit. Discarnate, I think, is outside your body. I've been realizing more and more that partisans to opposed philosophies share the same premises, which are usually unconscious. I love this he's beginning to point at something that I have noticed forever but do not put nearly as eloquently. I've been realizing more and more that partisans to opposed philosophies share the same premises, which are usually unconscious. I'll get to it in a second. Furthermore, these premises are transmitted by such social institutions as the structure of language and the learning of roles, influencing us in ways of which we are hardly aware. Thus, the conventional saint and the conventional sinner, the ascetic and the sensualist, the metaphysician and the materialist may have so much in common that their opposition is quite trivial. Like alternating heat and cold, they may be symptoms of the same fever. This is so beautiful because I've noticed this. So I grew up like super right-wing Christian, sort of, very sheltered. So later I naturally swung to the other side and I was like, this is going to be the side that has the answers, left-wing, liberal, sort of atheist, as I've touched on. And it was exactly the same energetically. What do I mean? The level of judgment, the level of closed-mindedness, the need to be right, and the incredible condescension and judgment of the other way of thinking. If they didn't talk about their opinions, which they do all the time, I would have had no idea if I was hanging out with a hardcore conservative or, a left-wing liberal, whatever you want. I don't even know the phrasing. The way they speak about each other is simply intolerable. How right they think they are about everything. It's the same person. It's the same way of thinking. It's just different opinions. And they would be horrified to know that. But it's the premises that are the same. It's the energy. It's the same fever, the ego fever, that we think we've figured it out, that we think we have something to defend, that the other side has nothing to offer us. And we all have to dice up into little groups, right? It was one of my things that I never got about the Christian thinking. It's like you got to be Christian. You got to be right-wing. Like I said, you're Christian and right-wing. Like those things go together. One is a religion and one is a political party. Why do those go together? Christian Science and evolution. I was raised on Christian Science. My parents are extremely hardcore that evolution couldn't have happened, and anyone that believes in evolution is against God. And at this conference, I threw it out. It didn't make my mom very happy. I was like, Mom, you can believe in evolution and still believe in God. Maybe it just took a while for the planet to develop, but it was still intelligently designed. We don't have to throw it all out. And she got so angry, right? Because she thinks that there's only one way that it can be. And we don't allow for people, and this is how we block truth. We don't allow people to find truth. We don't allow people to be loved or accepted. We have to do these tiny little groups. And we want to find the group we belong in, and then we can hang out with each other and all talk about the same things and agree with each other. Like we've actually discovered something. But you're still going to march to the grave. You're still going to die like everyone else. And you're still going to get there. And I assure you, think to yourself, there's something I missed. This is about service. If we really want to serve others and be happy, let me tell you, anyone I've known that's super opinionated and always needs to be right about everything is miserable. And they can't be of service to anyone unless it's to convince them that their way of thinking is right. And usually there's a little bit of like condescension in there, like, I'm the rich Westerner here to serve, the underprivileged, poor, colored person in some other country. And bring them the message of Jesus. I'm using missionaries. Not that that's a bad thing. That's a calling, and it's actually very difficult. But why do we think that they have to agree with us to find salvation? I will continue. Unconscious premises of this kind come to light when we try to understand cultures very far removed from our own. Let's just talk about that. We don't go to understand. Let me say that. We do. If you're a missionary in another country, you do have to acclimate. But there's also truth and beauty and wisdom that comes from other faiths. That's why I'm a universalist. That's why I study them. I feel like each one has a piece. So they too have their hidden assumptions. But when we compare these cultures with our own, the basic differences must at last become obvious. We can see where the differences are. So we realize that it's just something we learned and that it's not an absolute fact. Contrast. The Holy Spirit teaches through contrast. Not guilt, not shame, and not fear. And I'm going to throw out a really crazy cutting edge idea that there is no guilt, shame, fear, grief, despair, hell, damnation, or dying for your sins in the conversation of God. There is no suffering and sacrifice if you're really in the conversation of God. And I'm going to prove it, but not in this video. This is peculiarly true of the cultures of the Far East because they are high civilizations which arose in isolation from the West, developing patterns of thought and language startlingly different from those of the Indo-European strain. Thus, the value of the study of Chinese language and thought is not simply that we ought to be able to communicate with the Chinese people, important as this is. It is rather that Chinese studies tell us so much about ourselves for the very reason that of all the advanced cultures of the world, this is the most unlike our own in its way of thinking. And he starts to get into Taoism, which is really what this book is about, right? And that's beautiful, right? I hate when I do it, right? Which is beautiful, but let's pause for a moment, and let's think about what we've done to the Chinese culture. Chinese culture has been westernized, right? I used to go there. They're not connected to nature in the same way. The sludge, the environment is destroyed by what? Western consumerism. Now, they bought into it. They wanted the paycheck, right? It's brought great financial, materialistic abundance, at least to a portion of the population. But going there isn't a connection with nature anymore. Because of mad manufacturing, we're completely raping their landscape. It is very depressing. I've been in a lot of factories. I've been in a lot of component factories watching EVA and rubber be made and watching people making outsoles and sewing things. And, you know, it's not a spiritual culture connected to nature, certainly at this point. Now, granted, I'm in more of the industrialized city areas. I did go to a trip where I got to go hiking inland, which was amazing, but it was still, even watching the Chinese, I mean, I was at a national monument type of park and they're just throwing things into the water, littering everywhere. There wasn't this connection and concept. And this is the Chinese people I'm speaking about, by the way. The Communist Party is something different. And I will throw out, though, that America rapes and pillages their country because they make everything for us. And then we blame them for that. Like they're terrible for taking our jobs, which I assure you, if you go there, you don't want their jobs. We make them wrong because of the Chinese political party, which I'm not a fan of the Chinese Communist political party. The Chinese people suffer more than anyone, but the Chinese people are very kind, gentle, sweet people that have been victimized by the West, I feel in many ways, having gone there. But what do I know? I will continue. Thus, it was always such a delight to me that Chinese philosophy would never quite fit into the ruts of Western and even Indian thought. And this was preeminently true of the problem of spirit and nature. For there were no categories of Chinese thought corresponding to spirit and nature as we understand them. Here was a culture in which the conflict between spirit and nature hardly existed, a culture where the most naturalistic painting and poetry were precisely the most spiritual of its art forms. So here we go, this blending of spirit and nature. And that's what we're going for, right? We need to blend our ego and spirit together to reach max power. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I'm going to dig into it over the next couple of weeks. This book is not, however, a formal account of the Chinese philosophy of nature. I've discussed this at length in my previous book, The Way of Zen, which I probably need to get, and it has been marvelously illuminated by Joseph Needham in his Science and Civilization in China. I would probably love that and find it a little heartbreaking from where we're at now. My object here is not to expound and compare philosophical systems. It is to reflect upon a great human problem in the light of the Chinese view of nature, especially as it is expressed by Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu, Taoism. The urgency of the problem of man's relation to nature and the general intent of this book are, I think, sufficiently discussed in the introduction, which follows, which I'll probably read as well. Here I've also explained why the problem of man's relation to nature raises the problem of man's relation to woman. It's a brave conversation, a matter about which the spiritually minded members of our own culture have been significantly squeamish, and still are. Okay, it doesn't make any sense in the Bible. This is one reason I got upset with when I was younger, that God cares about the virginity of a woman, but not of a man. That's obviously written by a man into the book, or it's symbolic in some way, which Neville helps us unpack. The Bible was meant as a metaphysical text. Emmett Fox, Neville Goddard, these guys were looking at this book in a way where it unlocks a different level of power. Emmett Fox had so many followers. We've kind of lost all of that. Kind of gone back to this very literal interpretation, and it's not to hate on people that literally interpret it. But even at this conference I was at, I feel like I've been in two minds, right? I've been up against it. I've been in faith, and then I'm in fear, because I'm in different areas of my life facing both, and I feel super split. and kind of roller coastery, but it's been so cool to see the difference between my ego mind and my physical mind, faith and its relationship with fear. But at this conference, they'd be talking faith and it'd be so powerful and I'd really feel it. And then they'd bring up, the crucifixion of Jesus or hell and damnation and how guilty, they don't mean to, but when you bring up the death of Jesus and that he died for you, there's this instant like guilt, shame conversation, or at least guilt, like he did this for you and you need to be this way. And I understand some people find that redemptive and I'm not here to criticize that, but for me, it immediately sucked the power out. It's like the air goes out of your lungs. You're just like, it's not the right application of the message. Not that I want to get into defending my rightness because everybody gets to believe what they want to believe, but I don't think enough people are speaking into another possibility. And I think people are hungry for this other explanation. And maybe that's what I'm here for. I want to serve. I want to be happy. I want to help other people be happy. I want to help make peace about all this and not keep us diced up into these little groups, just like he was talking about here. My object here is not to expound and compare philosophical systems, right? Just like he says. I love that. Because this book is one in which I am frankly thinking out loud, I'd like to repeat some remarks from the preface to my supreme identity. I am not one who believes that it is any necessary virtue in the philosopher to spend his life defending a consistent position. It is surely a kind of spiritual pride to refrain from thinking out loud and to be unwilling to let a thesis appear in print until you are prepared to champion it to the death. I feel like he's speaking to me here because I want to have everything hammered out before I share it. And he has inspired me to say, no, I can do this process out loud and I can change my mind. I might post this today. I might change my mind tomorrow because I'm in process. And like he says, it's a kind of spiritual pride to refrain from thinking out loud, right? That I want everyone to like me. I started this channel, no one was watching it, so easy to post and express. Suddenly I got just a few subscribers, and thank you for being here if you are. But suddenly my ego came out, right? Like, oh my gosh, I need to post things that please people. I've got to serve them, but it's not really serving in that sense because suddenly I'm not able to freely express. It's really about what are people going to like, and all the power goes out. Suddenly I'm coming from my ego, a type of spiritual pride. Can I really stand behind this? Can I really defend this if somebody says something? Does this serve people? Versus just, I'm in process. I'm looking for answers and I think I'm on to something different and I want to share it. It's what I'm doing in my personal life. This is all stuff I'm doing for me and I just feel moved to share it. And I don't want to be about spiritual pride. Philosophy, like science, is a social function, for a man cannot think rightly alone. And the philosopher must publish his thought as much to learn from criticism as to contribute to the sum of wisdom. There you go. You want to criticize me? Awesome. You want to give me feedback? Point me in different directions? Awesome. Like, I want this to be a collective effort. That's why I posted it, because I believe that our minds combined are more powerful. If then I sometimes make statements in an authoritative and dogmatic manner, it is for the sake of clarity rather than from the desire to pose as an oracle. That's an Alan Watts quote from his preface, but I'm going to say that from me too. If I say anything in an authoritative and dogmatic manner, which I might have in this video, it's just for clarity rather than the desire to pose as an oracle. I'm a person in process as much as everyone else. I'm an asker, I'm a seeker. I'm looking, I'm learning, and I want to find a way to get the love and the joy and the happiness extracted in the experience of spirituality and nature. I'm a huge nature buff. I'm always in my garden, animals, all that. And nature healed me in my story. And the spirituality, all of it together. I'm just realizing this as I'm thinking about it. But I'm just a seeker and an asker like you. And then I'm just sharing about what I'm finding and thinking. There is the prevalent belief in the West that intellectual and philosophical pursuits are unessential ornaments of culture of far less value than active and technological accomplishments. This attitude is in great danger of being confused with the Eastern view that real knowledge is nonverbal and beyond the reach of concepts. And there are certain things that can't be spoken. They must be felt. As he said, there's life and feeling. But feeling is what we use to create with, which Alan Watts was not so aware of. That wasn't really a thing. other than Neville Goddard. I guess he would have been a contemporary, but I'm guessing they didn't bump into each other too much without the interwebs. But outside of Neville Goddard, I've never really, or maybe Earl Nightingale, heard of someone speaking about the way we think creating our reality. But that's the feeling portion. The feeling is drawing the life to us. There's like an interconnectedness here. I'm going to have to hammer out what I mean, but we do think that this is like unimportant, right? It's important to make money, have stuff, accomplish, do. But haven't we run that out? I mean, it's been 50 years since Alan Watts was around, and he was already talking about the mad manufacturers and sort of gobbling up the environment and earth. And we've done a good job of doing that since then. We sort of shut down this conversation after he passed in the 70s and the 80s and 90s and 2000s were just, and this book says that perfectly too, which we'll get into in another video. But our actions are almost invariably directed by a philosophy of ends and values, and to the extent that this is unconscious, it is liable to be bad philosophy with disastrous active consequences. The so-called non-intellectuality of the East lies as far above thought as mere activism lies below it. Non-intellectuality. Because I think what he's pointing at is your sages in the East, your monks don't go around touting how smart they are and speaking. They might share their wisdom, like I read from the Tick, but they don't, they're not out there promoting themselves, right? The Dalai Lama is a service-based individual all the time. He's not saying what an intellectual is, no smart he is, and he's sharing something that's feeling something enlightenment, which is a different level of experience. So it lies as far above thought as mere activism lies below it. And that's what we have really as being a good person here in the West is activism, right? I'm going to save someone, or I'm going to go get busy with a cause, rather than being the movement that is part of a cause, feeling that oneness and equality. Giving love to ourselves and to others and each person that's in our presence and us when we're in our presence. And that's what grows into a real movement. Such knowledge cannot be reached by making one's concepts unconscious under the impression that one is sacrificing the intellect. Such knowledge cannot be reached by making one's concepts unconscious under the impression that one is sacrificing the intellect. Distorting premises can be abandoned only by those who go down to the roots of their thinking and find out what they are. The only way you can get rid of your distorted premises is by going down to the root of your thinking and finding out what they are. And there's a humility to that. This was written in 1958. There's a humility to be like, why am I thinking what I'm thinking, rather than assuming what I'm thinking is right and always looking for evidence and collecting it against that. It's different. It's the opposite, right? Like the Course in Miracles says, the world's upside down. So rather than thinking I'm right and looking for evidence, which because of the law of attraction and I'm a creator is always going to come to me, beliefs are just thoughts I continue to think, and everything's going to continue to ratify what I think. I've got to get down to the premises that are off and reset those. I've got to unlearn what I've learned and replace my premises, my thoughts, my beliefs. My beliefs are just thoughts I continue to think. Start thinking new thoughts that will shift my beliefs, and those will become ratified. I'll see something completely new. Ego-based premises, scarcity-based premises versus abundance. There's enough for everyone. There's nothing going wrong here. We are in an environment of wellness, and that sounds absurd to some people. And depending if you're in pain, that can sound really absurd. That's why the piece of ownership and understanding how we're creating it with our false premises is so key. Because there's no bigger belief right now that we're all committed to being right about a distorted premise than being a victim. Everyone right now is really hooked on being a victim. And the world, or law of attraction, will just continue to bring us evidence of that. And we suffer collectively. If I'm victimized, or I believe I'm a victim, when I see someone else in pain about their own victimization, it victimizes me. There's a shared experience happening here. And it's not and it's hard. It's hard. As someone who lived as a victim for several decades, I can tell you that. It's hard to take accountability or ownership for making your world or how you have it when you feel like someone else is doing it to you, Because that's really icky. You've gotten really attached. I got really attached to it being somebody else's fault. And it's really humbling and a bit humiliating to take a look at it and be like, I could have been doing all of this to myself. And it'll make some people really angry. But once you pass through that curtain, that barrier, there's so much freedom, because now I have the power to do something. As long as I'm a victim, I'm giving all my power away. When I pass through that curtain and I say, you know what, I did this, I'm doing this, I get all my power back, because I can do something about the thoughts that I'm thinking. And Alan Watts is so unbelievably powerful and so deep in his message and points. And I get a little sad for him. I do. I've grieved for him a little bit over the last month or so as I've learned about how he passed and I was feeling towards the end, because he was so brilliant. But this is the magic, get this, of this environment and of this game. And as I'm going to be teaching with my understanding, as I express, again, we teach ourselves when we're teaching. I'm the one that's mainly learning. I'm the student. And my expansion and my understanding is expanding, and my ideas are evolving. And so they're not going to stay the same. But in my current view, what's beautiful about this is there's no endings. So Alan Watts laid a lot of little turds of wisdom and philosophy, right? All these books, all this knowledge, all these lectures, along with a lot of others. And maybe his death or ending wasn't so great. Maybe he didn't get there. But guess what? He gets to come back, and he can probably pick up his own material, and he doesn't have to start where he did. He can pick up his material, learn it, and get to another level. There's no endings. There's no tragedies here. He's not going to be the same Alan Watts. But that soul, that stream of consciousness, that idea continues, and continues in all of us. It's continuing in me. Who knows where I left off last? And that's the beauty and the redemption and the peace that can come from a thought process where there isn't endings and guilt and damnation and shame, that it's all going somewhere good. And there's really no urgency, because we're all going to get there eventually. But we just have to ask how much we do want to suffer. If we really have the power, if we really made this world and are looking to graduate. Part of the graduation is realizing that suffering isn't real. It doesn't mean we're not going to see it. It means sort of withdrawing our faith in it and putting our faith in something good going on here, something beautiful. And it's not in the dualism, it's not in being right, but it's about learning all of it, having a mind that's open to everything, as Wayne Dyer used to always say. It's such a point of power. There's an interesting conversation here about I want to serve, and I also want to serve myself. And I think there's a beautiful relationship that can come from this. And so anyway, I hope this in some way served you. It did serve me. And know that I really appreciate you. And I hope you don't mind that I diced up that reading with what I had to say. But I read it and it just moved me. And I just felt like this encapsulates the things that are on my heart to speak about today. Because like I said, I've been feeling split, like the sort of roller coaster, like up and down, fear, faith, because of my own journey and what I'm facing in my life. But it's giving me so much clarity, that contrast of realizing, oh my God, that's ego. Okay, now I'm shifting into spirit and surrender. And it's giving me so much. And I want to use that. This is a person in process. This is someone in process of spiritual evolution. And if you're here, you must be too. And so I hope you can get something out of that. I certainly did. And I love you. Be well. I'll be thinking about you and sending great focus and intention towards breakthrough and happiness for you today, and knowing that you're deeply loved because you are.